First off, really, the biggest thing is I got from your ex bio, which I see is quite interesting. You mentioned I believe it's in reference to when you say serving, you've served in the armed forces in the past, if I'm not mistaken, and now you say you're serving in the British Uprising. Mind giving a little bit of information as to what you mean by that and how you see this and what is meant by serving in the British Uprising?
It's a good question. I suppose the context of it would be that, I was serving the armed forces, we're supposed to be fighting our nation's enemy, that sort of thing. But now, obviously, I've been booted out of the armed forces for, I've officially been booted out of the armed forces for speaking to the press as a result of the DEI whistleblowing thing that I was involved in. We can talk about that in the podcast, but I suppose it's not so much of a throwaway comment, actually. Like it is, I did think about it for a second. I was like, what am I doing? I'm serving in the British Uprising now. Our people are being targeted from every angle, and I'm in a unique position where I can say what I want now. A lot of people aren't capable of doing that and need people to stand up for them. So that's what I'm doing. I wouldn't necessarily, I think serving is maybe the right word, because I wouldn't necessarily have chosen this as a career or anything. But I kind of see it as a duty at this point, because nobody else seems to be doing it. So long answer, but that would be why I wrote that there.
That's kind of how I see it as well, and when I'm talking to other people as well. You mentioned there the word duty. It's kind of how the way that I see it as well, and I think we're both in a similar position as well for various reasons. You mentioned you're speaking about DEI, and that's why you were removed from past job role and stuff like that. I'd like to go into that in a moment, but I think in my initial message I mentioned, I was also removed from a job position due to expressing political opinions and stuff like that. And
how long ago was that?
A couple of months ago.
Right.
A couple of months ago it was. And again, it was a private company. I don't necessarily hold anything against them. They can, do whatever they want. They can have whatever policies they want, and they can remove people that publicly express views that they don't agree with. So I don't hold anything against that, but it's emblematic of the current society that we're in, that for things completely outside of work and for comments that at the time I'd actually made before I'd even started there, they couldn't put a single complaint in with me, or at least they didn't have a single complaint against me for what I did in the job. And it was because of things that I expressed outside of that. That's why I ended up losing that. And you bring up duty, you bring up, again, being a voice for people. It's almost, bolstered me to try and go even further and actually take this a lot further now. And I think the common phrase is you don't take flack unless you're over the target. I think a lot of us, because we're taking that flack, we're over the target. Would you mind going about what were you specifically speaking about that led to them removing you? I've spoken to somebody in the past who served and tried to bring up the DEI stuff. Tim Davis, I think it was, he tried to bring it up, and he's had a lot of thing from speaking about DEI in the military. What kind of stuff was you bringing up, if you don't mind me asking?
Similar thing to Tim, I suppose, where he was witnessing in the RAF this huge political push to get women through, to put women in higher positions for, political victories, basically. So what's the big context? Well, I suppose the greater context is the Royal Marines is it's as elite as you can get in the infantry world of the armed forces, right? And we have incredibly high standards, and we have incredibly high standards for a reason, because when we're in, as Royal Marines do, go into frontline positions around the world, or even just dangerous places of any kind, you need to be like top 0.1% of men who you need to be able to sustain yourself. You need to be able to help the lads in incredibly tricky situations where potentially somebody's been shot. You need to go over, you need to get them on your back, and you need to take that person out of harm's way. That is the general context that led me to question what was happening with women in the Royal Marines, where it was abundantly clear to everybody in the Royal Marines, everyone's talking about it, is that they were pushing women through who weren't meeting these standards. So they would say, "Oh, we don't lower the standards, we don't lower the standards," and that's generally their response to this. But they were pushing women through. that weren't meeting the standards. Everybody was watching it. Everybody could see them, because a lot of these tests happen in front of the whole troop, in front of, people can watch on, and people were witnessing these women who weren't meeting the standards. And for me, that's to cross the bridge to your average person that may be listening to this thinking, oh, what's your problem with women? It's like, I don't have a problem with women at all. What I had a problem with was the idea that if I didn't say anything about this, that everybody could see this was an incredibly dangerous, potentially dangerous situation. If I didn't say anything about these women who weren't meeting the standards, who were being pushed through, that could result in one of my friends being killed. And yeah, that, like you say, before duty, I just realized, okay, I can either cower here and sort of, not stand by what I know to be true because I'm afraid of my job, or I'm afraid of retribution, or any of these sorts of things, or I can just do the right thing. So it's not been easy, but I went and just did the right thing, put a petition together, mate, and just got the petition around the Royal Marines. Everybody signed it, man. Like in a day, like a third of the Corps signed it before they shut it down. Yeah, it's just that's how I got into that situation, and their response to that was, I don't know, the more politically savvy people that are watching this would understand that I was in the way of a very big political movement where this pushing women in isn't so much about being nice, more so about putting loyalists in positions of power and enabling a situation where they can have the military be as compliant as the police are. So that's a general sort of context of the situation. How about yourself, mate? I mean, I suppose you may not, if it's a private company or whatever, you may not want to talk about so much about it, but if you want to talk about your situation, I'm happy to hear.
Well, all mine was, and that's the thing from coming from a completely different sector. So as you mentioned, I started talking about politics and all of these different issues just because I was going on X. I was seeing so many of these clips coming up of, typically regarding people highlighting stuff that people were coming over from other areas of the world and doing things that would not be acceptable here. And I'm just like, well, I'm seeing so many of these things. And when I first started becoming more politically active in this stuff, I watched, like, for example, Tommy Robinson's series on Rumble, The Rape of Britain. And, I understand he's quite a divisive character, has his, both from the right and the left, it seems people have, good and bad things to say about him. But it was my starting point, and then gradually learn more and more and more from there. But I thought, well, hang on, this needs to be talked about because this could be my community. This could be, it's like, Oldham or Rochdale or all these other areas, Glasgow, Edinburgh, etc. Today, it could be my area tomorrow. And quite funny, later on, after all this happened, one of the counties that was identified in Rupert Lowe's list of 85 counties he identified was being complicit in covering up sort of scandals of this nature. I'm not exactly sure if it's specific in this, but they're literally a county just over from me. And it's not a county in any way that's been taken over in many of the other ways that you've seen counties in England being taken over. So it's very, very scary. But I was just like, I'm going to speak about this on the platform I had at the time. It was a podcast which I had to talk about personal training stuff because that's my background. I'm a health and fitness guy, right? I literally called myself the political PT for a while. That's literally what I called myself. And then what happened was I was just talking about that, and then when I went into work in this gym, wasn't long after, one of the guys, because I had it still linked in my link tree at the time, had gone and found some of the episodes where, a lot of the times I just talked about like a new study that had come out, maybe to do with like cold water immersion or heat therapy or whatever, or different training practices in a new study that's just come out. But then I was also talking about the other stuff and highlighting how we're going more and more into government tyranny to try and cover this up. I was pulled into a meeting and basically just said, completely honest, right? And they just basically said that then, oh yeah, well, can't be, services are no longer required, basically. It's quite right. Thing how I think they said they made it quite easy for them because I was still on my probation period in the role at the time. I'd only been there about sort of 2 months, I think it was. But like I said, it's just in the gym, because past comments, all of the comments that were referenced, broad categories being, for example, anti-immigration, anti-Islam, anti-feminist. Those being the broad, categorizations. And then I was like, well, on the parts where they said parts I thought that they were quite inaccurate with how I recounted things. I was like, I don't think I've actually said that.
Yeah.
But then again, they just said, well, your services are no longer going to be required, and I was let go that same day.
How did that feel, man?
So it's just, again, emblematic of the current political atmosphere that's going on. Obviously, I won't name the place, but yeah, it's just try and speak about these things because, again, in Wales in particular, I see it as the situation is not quite as, at least it seems to me, not quite as progressed as other areas in the UK, especially England and some of the big cities in Scotland and stuff like that, where I know you've been at some of the protests. And I do have to say, very gifted public speaker. I do have to say that. I don't know whether it's just the passion coming through and stuff like that. Very gifted public speaker.
Oh, man, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I was listening to one of your speeches whilst I was working the other day. I think I might have been editing or something like that. And I was like, fair play.
Nice.
Really,
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
You can tell when somebody really truly believes it in the way that they speak it. But yeah, I kind of lost my track there for a moment. But yeah, like I said, just they said my services were no longer required, and I thought, well, hang on, this just makes it even more necessary to carry on doing it, because we've seen how much the government, the media, all of these other entities will lie, right? And they're trying to push these very sinister agendas. And you mentioned there the most sinister thing I took away from what you said there was that they're trying to put loyalists in positions of power in order to politicize them. To politicize them in the way that they've done the police, and we've seen that they've done that to the police already in a terrifying degree. I can only imagine the ramifications if that was the military. And would you say then that has actually, again, I think I probably already think how you're going to answer this question. Would you say that's made the military as a whole weaker or stronger?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely made us weaker. There are dividing lines where there didn't used to be dividing lines. There are, let's think of a specific example. You back in the day, you would usually be in, if you had a day off, you'd be doing, you'd be practicing your skills and drills. Now you're sitting in a lecture room being lectured about diversity. Now you're sitting in a lecture room being told about, the sexual harassment, what do you call it? Policies of the armed forces. And now you're in the lecture room being told about, just being fed political messaging. And does it contribute to operational effectiveness? Absolutely not. And there are, look at history. There are times when it is necessary to have people that are capable of defending the nation. It kind of seems like a weird thing to say at the minute, because what we're going to be invaded. We're going to be invaded, but I would argue the invasion is happening. As a side point, we can talk about that. But
I completely agree with you.
Weakness is never a strength. Weakness is never a strength, and whether it's now, a few weeks from now, a few months from now, that they will reap what they have sown in this instance. And I think some people will, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, if you have foreign interests or not, that's a good thing or a bad thing. But for the people of this island, it's a bad thing.
Absolutely. And it's exactly as you mentioned. It's nothing to do, as you said, with people being women or whatever other characteristic people want to put in. It's the fact that, say for example, wherever you may have been. How long were you in the Royal Marines, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, just a few years, mate. Just a few years. It's a slightly depressing question to answer, because there's so much I wanted to do, and contribute. But that being said, I would do it again 100 times. But yeah, just a few years.
No, but seriously, no. Thank you. Honestly, thank you for your service, and
Cheers,
not only
mate.
that,
You don't have to
the
thank me.
service. No, but the service you put in as well of being willing to speak about these things when so many seemingly weren't willing to at least put themselves in the firing line, and putting yourselves in the political firing line. There's something to be said for that, with how much it can ruin your life in terms of what people then say about you, your character being assassinated, and trying to find future work and all of these other things. But it's literally, as you mentioned, and I've seen that Pete Hegseth and other leaders in the US, Kash Patel and people like that, for saying that there's going to be basic fitness standards in like the FBI and the military and all of these things. They're saying, oh, well, that just means you're sexist, you're against women. Be like, no, well, if they can do it, they can do it. It matters that if, for example, you were to, try and go from cover to cover and you end up getting shot and you're down on your back in the middle of some alleyway or some road or whatever, that your squad mates can lay down suppressing fire and get you the hell out of that situation. That's ultimately what matters. Doesn't matter what set of chromosomes you have at that point. It just matters that you're strong enough to do the job. And I think you mentioned there, we've become, again, through the public school system as well, and the increased feminization of the society, to see weakness as a virtue. I always like the parable: it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. You know what I mean? And where we've gone now, and we've seen all of these different ways to show our weakness as a virtue, it's just showing the rest of the world. The rest of the world is seeing that and being like, oh, well, let's have a bit of that. They're showing how weak they are. Let's go and take advantage of them. And that's why we're seeing now that we have no guiding principles in British society. It's increasingly being taken over by those who do. And usually that's coming then from hostile foreign cultures as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why, again, it makes it all the more important to speak up on those things. And I think as well, you'd be actually, I don't know if anybody else may have mentioned this, the one thing that popped up to me as well, you're doing the women a favor as well, at least from how I see it. Because if it was to be that they were put in that position, and then because they knew that they couldn't do it, they'd end up costing one of their squad mates their life. Right. And they knew, because they'd been pushed through for political reasons. It wasn't because of their aptitude. It wasn't because of their merit. If tragedy was to happen, that's going to weigh on them as well. And they could have been saved from that if they weren't pushed into that by those who were above them acting in political interests, I think.
Yeah, I try and not necessarily, I see that as like a side, because I think all too often people make arguments from, when we're saying that we don't, for instance, if I was to say, okay, I want to have a homeland, I want to have a more or less homogenous society here. A lot of people feel that need to be like, but it would actually be good for the Africans for them to keep all their really smart Africans or whatever. And then I don't know. So I'm not like gatekeeping, but I will say, yeah, absolutely. Like these people that are pretending that they are, I generally frame it from the lads and what could happen to the lads. But on the flip side, totally, I agree. How is it good to be pushing women through on these false pretenses? It's like Joseph in his coat of many colors in one way, is that you're pushing these people into a situation where it's like you think you're doing a positive thing by giving them more than everybody else, but you're actually robbing them of the dignity of being somebody that's earned what they have. By the end of training, if there is a woman that passes out training one day, nobody's going to believe it. Nobody's going to think of that person. Nobody's going to respect them. Everybody's going to think, okay, they were pushed through. And maybe there is a woman that could pass training. Maybe there isn't. When that time comes, or if it doesn't, if it comes, you won't be a nice guy for having pushed these girls through. It's for the men and also for the women, just an incredibly bad situation.
I can't help but agree. It's like you want everybody on that battlefield or whatever it is to be on the same page, same level of training, passed on their own merits, and as a result they're sure of themselves, and then they're going to have their squad mates or their comrades back in the best way. One last thing on this, and it's because I've seen a lot of a video about World War II in particular, and about how veterans looked at their service, those who survived and come back from World War II, and when they were interviewed in, our modern day. I can't remember the exact time frame. Maybe it was around the turn of the millennium or just later on. And they were asked about, reflecting on their service, reflecting on the sacrifices they'd made. And in that regard, a lot of them, at least from some videos I've seen on YouTube by some accounts, a lot of them did not have very positive things to say based on how they've seen the country turn out, in the modern day, or maybe how now they see maybe how things were political a way they didn't see them before, or whatever. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. Reflecting on your service, elements of that, what are your reflections? Did the outlook on things change from when you signed up to when you were eventually removed due to things like the politics and stuff like that?
In what sort of way? Could you outlook on the military or outlook on politics in general?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm saying, like, a lot of people, for example, more so on the military. So I think some of them as well, seeing the more wider political things, they look back on their service, whether it may be, particularly with regards to conflicts in the Middle East, like Libya and stuff like that, when they're now looking back and seeing it for the political moves that they were in, and now thinking, I think some people would be thinking that, oh, maybe I wouldn't have signed up if I knew that's what I was going to be doing, and if I'd known that was going to be the thing that I was doing. I want to stress, obviously, this is not in any way to disrespect anybody's service or anything like that. But I'd like to know, as your perspective on your service in line of what you were being told to do and the initiatives you were maybe being told to support have changed at all.
Okay. So maybe uniquely for me, I was more or less aware of the military industrial complex. I was more or less aware of all the political things I am aware of now. Miyamoto Musashi has this thing where he basically splits society or people into a number of different places that they're sort of born to be, or not necessarily born to be, but you've got your warriors, you've got your farmers, you've got your your builders, you've got your merchants, that sort of thing. And I've just always been drawn to combat. I wanted a career in combat. I wanted to be a cage fighter for a number of years, to be honest. Until I realized it wasn't quite the life that I wanted. And I thought, okay, if we do end up, and I was actually, okay, I was slightly different. I thought, okay, if we end up in a war with China, I don't want to be in, and this is where I was thinking, oh, but we'll end up with a war with China. So I want to have all these skills and be in amongst the lads. I want to be a part of a brotherhood, and, made that shift from sort of cage fighting to the real martial arts, the real sort of, the real war, as it were, even though we're not necessarily at war. But I initially I wanted to join because I thought, okay, we're going to be at war with China potentially, and that sort of changed by the time that I joined. To be honest, I thought, no, we're not going to really end up at war with China. We've got much bigger fish to fry domestically, and I was aware of that all the way through trading, and my time in the Corps. So uniquely, my position didn't really change very much. It was more so perhaps a doubling down of what I already knew to be true, is that, the biggest thing that is happening to society is demographic change. We're being invaded by the southern border. Those are some of the biggest negative aspects of, like, put it in the past, like if this was happening in the past, the negative effects that are as a result of demographic change and the southern border invasion are much worse than what we have taken in multiple other wars. Do you know what I mean? Especially when you look at the child victims, when you look at the female victims. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I was sitting there eating my food that I'd paid through the nose for, and was just thinking, I can't believe I'm paying through the nose for this tiny portion of food, when you've got a bunch of people from halfway around the world that, you might have heard in my speech the other day, like, I used to live in Africa. I know what a refugee looks like, right? And you've got these piss takers, these 20-something-year-old men that are here getting stuff for free, and then on top of that, when it was, that's one context that applies to a vast majority of the people in the Corps, that's why morale is so low, because we don't feel like we're being used to fight the war that we should be fighting on the southern border. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I will link it back in.
No, it's no problem at all.
And then the second thing, big doubling down of realization that I already knew was the sort of the dividing lines that they want between men and women. They don't want men and women to coexist in the workplace. They want men and women to be at odds in the workplace. They don't want equality. These people, it's not on their remit. And to see that firsthand and to witness it in the military and witness potentially people's lives being sacrificed at the altar of DEI, that was for me just like, okay, I know this. I know what I'm looking at here. I'm aware of the politics that are around this. This is the enemy. We can talk about, there's Russia. Russia, they've got a smaller economy than California and they're not invading us. But we are being invaded. Our culture is being eroded. The negative effects that our people are being victimized by. Those are the invasion, the eroding of our culture. So that is our enemy. Mm-hmm. And so I understood that before I joined, because I just want to be a warrior. Like I want to be. I feel like I'm kind of born to just. I like combat, so I joined and was aware of that anyway. Went in and I wasn't expecting to leave on such terms, but long answer, sorry, but definitely just a doubling down of what I already knew. And by the time that I left, it was very apparent to me that I was fighting the right fight, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose the way it might be different for yourself if you sort of seen that going, if you already had that political insight going, and I can see how you might have already been a little bit more switched on, maybe, so to speak, as to what the actual wider game was, the actual wider sinister agenda. And it is a very, very sinister one indeed. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.